Well, good morning, everyone. I am very excited for this week's episode and a bit of a time change, as you may have noticed. We're switching this to be from 2 o'clock Eastern to noon Eastern, and that will be going forward from now on. Every Tuesday at noon, we'll be doing an episode of the show. And you might have noticed as well, we do this live, but then we also take the audio from this and then we put it into a podcast form, which usually comes out about a day or so after. Love having people join in live. Love the interaction. If you are tuned in, you want to say hello, ask any questions for the guests, would love to have your involvement as well. And if you're watching after or listening after, we certainly appreciate that as well. This week's guest is going to be very exciting to talk to, because I've had a number of guests on in the past who shared their experience of their previous careers. We had a Dallas Cowboy come on who transitioned into industrial real estate. We had another guy working in sales tech. He came on and shared it. This guest, Sean, is actually a combat vet, served in the United States Marine Corps, had a number of different assignments. We're going to talk about that as well, and what he did as a Marine. And then he transitioned into industrial real estate investing a few years ago. So we're going to go through his whole story. Again, if you have any questions for Sean as we're going through this, please feel free to put that in the chat. And with that, Wyatt, if you could bring on Sean. Sean, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining me on the show.
Hey, thanks, Chad. I'm very excited for the stream. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, and you and I had a chance to talk last week, so I got to hear a little bit more of your story, but I'd love other people to share in that as well and just hear about your journey. And you had mentioned that industrial real estate, if we're looking at your life story as a book, industrial real estate might be few chapters near the end of the book. So let's start right at the beginning, a little bit about your background, and then how you got to be a Marine. I think that's gonna be a very fascinating story to unpack on this.
Okay, that's a good one. All right. So first, chat, I was born. No, let me start from so the day I was born. No, so I was born. I was born in Maryland, Columbia, Maryland, born and raised. And I'll fast forward to high school. During that time, I really wasn't too sure about what I needed to do in order to go forward. I was honest with myself. I knew I wasn't disciplined. I knew I wasn't ready to actually go to college, and we didn't have much money. My mom was single, and my dad passed when I was 1 year old. And so I knew I had to do something. And the military was offering, educational programs, traveling. I never traveled in my life before. So I knew that I would have discipline, possibly a brotherhood. So at that time, I signed up, just not knowing what to do next, and of course relying on the military to help me and guide me through kind of the next phase of my life. So I joined. I was supposed to go with my friend. He ended up saying he had asthma, so they didn't let him go. So I ended up going by myself. Did time there, and first I got in. I usually tell myself some story like I knew my uncle was a Marine, but that's not true. I found out later. I kind of just joined and then made up the story later in the back end. But no, it was a great time. I enjoyed it. I loved the time. I went to boot camp. After that, I kind of got shipped to Iraq, so I did a tour there. Definitely spent some time, and then I learned about this Marine Security Guard program, where it was about kind of going overseas, being a diplomat, working with the Department of State. So it was kind of my chance to kind of, let's say, clean myself up from a dirty, grimy Marine into something that was, a representative of the United States of America. So I had some hard posts though, Chad. They were terrible. Like it was very hard. I was in Barbados, then I went to Thailand, and then I went to Brazil. So I had it pretty easy in comparison. And after that, I went private contracting after the time I completed the Marine Corps and being in embassies, and got to meet the president, a couple of the presidents at the time, Obama, Secretary of State, and it was a amazing ride. I enjoyed everything. I learned a lot about living overseas, being overseas, about markets, and most people don't know, U.S. embassies tend to have more than visas, but they have like a economic center and a political center. So I learned about economics and how America does business with foreign countries at all levels, military, enterprise, private sector. So it was a very interesting life coming up for those 7 years when I was in the Marine Corps.
I'd love to expand on all of that if you don't mind. What was
Yeah.
the process of boot camp? Because every a layman like myself all I know about it is what you see in movies and TV shows. So what was that process of boot camp actually like?
It now that I look back, it was a bunch of funny moments sprinkled in with a lot of hard work. And it was just a bunch of people and at that time, I don't know if it still is like that, but it was the men were with the men and the girls were with the girls, or ladies with the ladies. And so at that time, I just remember going in, stepping on those yellow footprints and just being yelled at the whole time. Maybe towards the end it got better, but it was just intense training back to back, regiment, get on the footsteps from morning to dusk till dawn. Sometimes at nighttime, you had to stand and watch a night shift, kind of like night guard, kind of watching the platoon while the rest of the team sleeps. So, but between doing that and just going through the trials and tribulations, but really the brotherhood and camaraderie was kind of like the everything, the bread and butter. Guys from all backgrounds, all races, all places, just coming together and just being changed from what we were when we came in the door, which was just this melting pot of a bunch of different guys and characters, to just like this refined, buzz cut. Everybody was in shape. Some people came in there like not in shape. Everybody left, in shape, ready to go, and just super, let's say, excited about, starting their career as a Marine. Everybody was crying on the day of Crucible. It was towards the end where we kind of build up to this last rites of passage in order to get that Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. And I remember we were we were walking, doing the hike, and drill instructors yelling at us. We were sleeping in the mud, going to sleep wet. But we just had to do all the activities together. And when we all kind of took the walk back, because after that you walk back and do the same hike, it was maybe like a 10-mile hike, maybe longer, I can't remember. And once we got there, that's when they hand you that Eagle, Globe, and Anchor, and everybody was crying. All the tough guys were no longer tough. Everybody was in tears, and it was a very important moment for all of us. But it was definitely kind of like the movies.
So the Hollywood directors weren't too far off when they described it in movies then.
Yeah, just like Full Metal Jacket. If you've seen that movie, it was kind of like
Yep.
that.
So
Besides
then
the
fast
massacre,
forward.
nothing in it.
So fast forward to you did a tour in Iraq. What was that experience like?
Well, at the time, I guess I played too much Halo when I was young. So I was like, oh, I want to be on the front lines. I want to go to combat and I want to do, my service. So when I first joined the fleet, that's what we call it, when you actually graduate boot camp and you're schooling for whatever specialty you're going to do, I kind of volunteered myself and they had military police. And so they kind of pushed me out my main unit, which I was a warehouseman. So there we go. Maybe I had it in me, right? I was a warehouseman, and I did supply, and then they put me in the billet. Like once I got into the fleet, and we did training, and we just prepared 29 palms, doing role plays, convoys. We did it all, like months leading up to our tour in Iraq. And I remember the day just flying there. We flew on some big, big, big plane, the biggest plane I've seen. And of course, the 4-star generals at the top, they got all the lobster and champagne, and we're all like, PFCs and privates at the bottom. And we just flew all the way to Kuwait, I believe. That was the first destination. And then we took a C-13, which is a military aircraft, into Iraq. And we just ran out of that, that bay door once it dropped and the heat hit me. And then all the sand came swooping up and everybody was like, go, 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 go over here, this team. And everybody ran around and got their stuff done. And then it doesn't hit you when you first get there. But the first day we were there, we were getting an in brief and we just saw a big cloud just come up, and I'm like, what is that? And then the sound rushed through, and it was just, mortar rounds usually being shot at the base. So once we got there, it was kind of just like, you're in theater, welcome. So it was pretty intense.
Well, first of all, thanks for your service. As I'm sure other people are thinking as well. It's that there's very few people that are willing to, first of all, even attempt to go through the training and the requirements to become a Marine, let alone fly to another part of the world and actually engage in combat. So thank you for your service on that. When you transition then into the other side, going from that boots on the ground to now being more on the intelligence side, can you share some of the things that you've learned along that way? You alluded to just the way that America does business with other countries, and you've now lived in 30 plus countries, if I'm not mistaken. So you've got a
Yeah.
pretty global perspective on not just the world as a whole, but also how the US does business with all these. Anything jump to mind or anything that you could share that would be perhaps enlightening or informative to people like myself who just wouldn't even have any idea where to even start with this?
Yeah. Uh, well, U.S. embassies have a lot of arms to them. A lot of agencies operate in U.S. embassies, which most people really don't know. So they're like, the DEA, they're in America, right? They're overseas also, trying to stop, of course, narcotics or FBI. All these different types of agencies are also overseas. And also, like I said, the economic division or the political division, they just don't hand out visas. America is very diverse with the activities that are in the interest of America. And so most people don't really know that. They just go to the embassy and say, hey, like, where's my visa, right? But there's all these other different type of components moving inside the embassy. And every time, somebody found out I was from the embassy overseas, they're like, hey, you work at the embassy? And I'm like, yes, here it comes. You think you can help me with a visa? Like, they just think everybody's just, processing visas. And, the embassy does way more than that. And so that's like something that I had to learn. I didn't know that prior to going to the duty. And so that was a good experience. And, like you said, kind of transitioning into that job was very different. We did do school in there. I graduated second in my class. It was very intense, educational, of course, professionalism, your diplomacy. It's just a complete shift. Because, before I was only talking to a bunch of soldiers just going back and forth. But now, you hit the corner and the ambassador to the United States and Hong Kong is right there, right? So you have to change the way you communicate and the way you carry yourself, and it's entirely different duty. A dignitary can walk into the door, a congressman, councilman. It's so many different types of people that are at a U.S. embassy and come in and out. So we had to switch gears, which was very hard in itself. So instead of coming in boots and utes, which is like a military uniform, I was usually coming to the embassy and, ties, t-shirts, polos. So it was almost like a corporate environment, just on a public level.
So that ties in nicely because I see Ron Rody is in the chat and he commented on my shirt. Speaking of attire, see, red, nice shirt,
Nice
Chad.
shirt. Yeah,
So
nice shirt.
yeah. Oh, real quick on the shirt. So it's cold where I am right now, and I'm just trying to channel the warmth. And I know you're in Thailand, if I'm not mistaken, right, Sean? You're
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Thailand
yeah.
right now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I was trying to emulate the warmth that you must be experiencing versus the cold that I'm
You do look
literally.
like somebody on the beach in Thailand right now.
Real quick as well, Ron has a YouTube channel. He's an industrial real estate lawyer and investor. He's closing in on 1,000 subscribers. So go check out his channel. He puts out some awesome content, a lot of good videos. Did one on Florida the other day, which was really interesting. So give Ron some love and go support his channel. Now on industrial real estate. So you've made some huge transitions in your life. Didn't have any background in being in the Marines. So you transitioned into the Marines, then you transitioned into a different part in Marines, work in the embassy. Now you've transitioned into industrial real estate. Your life story is just about transitioning, like all the different things that you've
Yeah.
transitioned in and out to. How did it come to industrial real estate after that diverse background that you had? What was it about industrial real estate, or how did you make that switch into industrial?
I would want to mention, like, right when I got out of the Marine Corps, there was a time period, like 7 years, I worked in kind of like the construction of US embassies, but this was all private sector, right? And so that kind of, I guess it was one seed, it was many seeds that actually led to the plant. But nevertheless, when I used to sit there and look at the complex building and look at all the wires and watch the team just build up the US embassy, I was very fascinated and I thought it was very interesting, because I only seen residential homes before. I never was like front row seat to a commercial grade type of building. And so that was a great experience. And I learned many different things in that sector, but it was more, surveillance and counterintelligence and things of this nature. And so after that, I was blessed to be in Tel Aviv, Israel. And quite honestly, I maybe started my investments when I was around, like, 27, maybe 25, but I kept just pulling money out of the stock market. I didn't know where I was going with it. Just, kind of just trying to make my way of like, how do I grow my money or how do I, accumulate wealth? And I was in Tel Aviv and I did a lot of interesting things with my veteran loan. We have a VA loan, which allows you to basically move into a residential home with no money down. So I found some clever ways on how to house hack and, get a quad. And then I found about joint loans and getting a commercial residence with the VA loan with no money down. So it was very different because the people that I was talking to at the time, I found them with bigger pockets. They ended up becoming my mentors. But I was reaching out to people in Israel and I said, hey, look, I'm just started. I'm willing to go get coffee, do whatever, right? I just want to be around like minded individuals and talk about just real estate. And at the time, they were more focused on distressed properties in Florida. And so we met, had coffee. I worked maybe about 13 hours that day. And then after that, I met him after like 2 hours of sleep. We had a conversation by the beach. And then I went back home, slept for about 2 more hours, and went to work again for 12 hours. But it was worth it. 2 weeks later, he contacts me. We have another conversation. He's like, I got something going on. I don't know if you want to, look at and see what's happening. And he was like, yeah, the multifamily thing you did. He was like, that's nice. That's cute. Right. But I'm going to show you the big leagues. And I was like, okay, like, and so he started showing me warehouses. And I was like, like, I didn't get it at the time. And so I invested before in Alibaba. So I knew a lot about like e-commerce and the need for like this type of real estate for the growing demand of e-commerce. So I wasn't too much in the dark, but I just wasn't familiar about like industrial. So at the time, he said, would you be interested in learning more or just, see what we got going on? And I said, of course, anything. I'm there. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for anything. I really just wanted the education. That's the most valuable thing to me. It came to, and so that's how I kind of got introduced. I don't want to go on a rant. So that's how I kind of got introduced to the real estate at that time from a mentor. And then after that, that's a different part of the story.
Well, let's go there next.
Okay.
So you got introduced to it, and I share a very similar story. I started in 2005, and I knew very little about industrial real estate. When I joined a brokerage and then ultimately started investing, I thought I'd be working in office towers or retail, knew very little about industrial either. So I was thrown into the fire and I'm very glad I did. It literally transformed my life learning about it. But there's very little that you intuitively know. Like you wouldn't have been taught much, even though you were a warehouse guy in the Marines. What do they call? What was the name for it?
Yeah, warehouse clerk. That's what they call me.
Warehouse clerk. Even though you were technically a warehouse clerk, you weren't given a handbook on how to be a successful industrial real estate investor. So what was the journey then on you're interested, mentors sparked that curiosity. What was the process then of figuring out how to go from A to B?
Yeah, that was another one too. So I guess one of my skill sets is I've always been like hungry for knowledge. Like I would study anything. I might not be a master of a specific thing, but I knew a lot about a lot of different things, and then I would just piece it together and figure it out from there. And so at the time, they were like, "Well, hey, we're from Israel. We're not familiar with Florida, neither am I. But I was like, I'll do anything, I'll learn. So he gave me some addresses, and he was like, find the owners. We don't know where these guys are at, but we want these buildings. And I was like, no problem. So I just went PropStream, Google Maps, circling the block on Google Maps, because I'm in Israel also at this time. So I'm not there to kind of like start knocking on doors, or bay doors, shall I say. So I was just like, okay, well, I'll figure it out. So I downloaded a bunch of things. I learned how to skip trace. I went straight to YouTube. That's how I came to your channel, which was one of the first channels that I actually was getting all my information on. I'm like, okay, I don't even know nothing about like industrial. So if the seller hits me with a question, I'm like, I wouldn't know what I'm talking about. And so I just watched your channel, started trying to find things on YouTube, which is very hard, like we talked about before. And it was mostly that, watching how people do cold calling and building out pipelines and deal flow just with residential. Now, here's the trick. I had to figure out what's the differences in the nuance when you come to industrial versus residential. It's two different types of people you're reaching out to, right? Like maybe just reaching out to somebody that has a family and just live in a single family home, right? Or just got it inherited. But when you're talking about industrial property owners, they're vastly different. And so I just had to learn a strategy, just use YouTube University. And that's what gave me everything. I didn't have that, oh, hey, welcome to this firm. And you're going to be an acquisition manager. So let me show you what this billet is. No, I just had to go to YouTube, go to Google, and figure out, like, okay, what does the acquisition manager do? Okay. Then start stacking up and building out the system like that. And I did that many times before in the military. When I was a detachment commander, we'd get sent out to a foreign country, and I have to piece everything together, on duty and off duty. Like, what do we have to do? How do we get drivers? How do we get a chef? Where do we find housing? Where's the money allocated? How do the Marines get their proper training when it comes down to the military? When it comes down to special duty training? So I was just piecing, everything together like this, and I had a good success rate. And they liked what I came back with. I had them set them up with a couple of appointments, talking to a couple of sellers direct. And so at that point, they were like, we like this guy. They asked somebody else, and that guy didn't want to leave his acquisition company. And so I thanked him later. But then they said, okay, let's go with Sean. He had great results. And then, of course, from there, they put me in a position. And then I had to build out a whole team, a whole system. And then that's how that kind of went into that phase. But from the jump, it was just YouTube, your channel, and so many other stuff that I found online and just learning.
It's great to hear. And thank you for the mention on the channel. I do love just putting content out there. It's just a labor of love for me. And I always enjoy when hearing that. That's helpful. Ron, that's a great way to learn. I agree. I've learned a ton of stuff myself from that. Angelica, very interesting topic and perspective from Sean. I agree. This is such a fascinating story, hearing how you've transitioned into this. And one thing I just want to dive into a little bit deeper, because this is fascinating to me as well, is that you've essentially found a way to uncover a lot of information related to properties without even being in that specific market. So if you were in Tel Aviv and you were looking at Florida property, not in Florida, you mentioned a few things. You use Google Maps, Skip Trace. Can you elaborate on how you've used those a little bit more, just to uncover more information?
And if I did that, then I have to take people out. No, I could
Nobody wants to challenge you on that.
No, so I just really, so I learned a couple of skills that people were doing online from, just like I said, residential. And so skip tracing was kind of like, you pull down the information from PropStream, and then after you collectivize it, you put it on an Excel sheet, and then once you get it on an Excel, then maybe it's the same app, maybe it's a different software, skip trace, skip batch. They had all these different names, right? Some get better results than the others. So I just kind of leveraged all these different technologies. Skip trace, maybe I'll get a cell phone number, maybe I'll get an email address. And then with some, maybe PropStream or some other, online application or software, I had to figure out the email campaign. So these were the two ways. This is before CoStar came in my life and blessed me. But prior to that, I was trying to just piecing things together with skip tracing, running that property address, and kind of looking for those points, whether it be the, registered agent, or whether it just be, most of the time, the owners didn't have their name just at the city. It was maybe an LLC or something like that. So I really had like hit or miss, but nevertheless, it gave me something that I could drum up. And so I just used those numbers, put them into it, uploaded the sheet, skip trace. Okay, I got a 10% success rate on that. Okay, take those nuggets, put them in the system, put them in my database where I was collecting all the names and all the property. And that's how I kind of went about it. Now, it was kind of difficult because, the company was like, hey, we need to chase this property. It was so many properties just popping up. They wanted to chase them. And I was like, well, let me build out a system with we were focusing on small bay industrial at the time. And so I was like, let me just build up a bunch of small bay industrial properties across these 3 counties we're looking in. It's only so many, right? Like, so it's not like residential homes. They're everywhere. I was like, well, once we kind of tag the animals, we know where they're at. We don't have to go out and search for them every day. We just have that understanding of where they're at and where are we at in relation to that property. So have we reached out to the owner? Is he cold? Is he hot? And then so we could just attack the same properties with different methodologies again and again versus running around and just like, oh, I seen a property today. Let's go attack it. It's like, let's get the stats. Let's see if the macro adds up, right? The things we need. And then let's see if we can, get an offer over to that guy or not. So that's how I kind of went about it. But sometimes, like you said, I had to do Google Maps and like look on the side of the building. And sometimes the owner had that, that number for rent. Like, you want to rent a small bay? So I have to call up that number from my Skype while I was in Tel Aviv.
Fascinating. And that should be a good lesson for property investors or brokers out there, that you can do a lot of things that wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago. So technology has made that really interesting. And Nancy joined and said, amazing story. So she's appreciating how creative you've been. And in addition to just your incredible life story, you've accomplished quite a bit. I'm sure that you're taking a lot of skills that you had being in the Marines and now into real estate. And I want to expand on that a little bit more too, on what you're, so 2 parts, I guess. Is first, I want to hear about how you were targeting properties. You mentioned small bay. Why small bay? And what was the general criteria that you were looking for in that category?
Okay, so we were looking for a B and C class, and we were looking for anything from 5 million all the way to 100 million. And, the price point would change because, the market was pretty crazy during these times. It was definitely a seller's market. And it was small, multi-tenant. So we were looking for multi-tenant, small bay, and of course, from the budget of 5 all the way up to 100 million. And of course, they usually wanted something beyond like, maybe 10,000 square feet, right? But what happened is in the back end, one owner specifically will have like maybe 50,000 square feet, but he'll have them in a portfolio of 2,000 and 5,000. So you have to connect those dots also. You're thinking that's a different owner, but it's all the same guy. He just got them, separated in different LLCs or entities or whatever. But, we just had to basically find that. And those were our criteria of what we were looking for. It was real, easy. And like I said, that market too, we were looking for 3 counties in South Florida at the time. It was Broward, Miami-Dade, and West Palm Beach. And so I just looked there, and, eventually we moved out to Tampa and then also to North Carolina. And, but at the time we were just on those 3 counties. So that's how I went about kind of looking for those properties. And so what I did sometimes is get a county map. And from the county map, the zoning map, I would see, obviously, this is where the industrial is allowed. And then I would find that correspondent on the Google map. And then I would use satellite or whatever have you. And then I would just go down the road if I didn't find it on the CoStar, which I got later. But once I had CoStar, it made it way easier. But it still was a process that I kind of like just drove down the street virtually and saw the property, looked at it, and I said, okay, that's what we're looking for. And even if it wasn't, I kind of got them all just because it's only so many, right? So the point was, at one point, I was going to get all of them because it's not that hard. It's not like I said, single family homes and other things. It's just way more. They outnumber that. So that's kind of how I went by it, and that's what we were looking for. And I know your second part was, wait, why we were looking at small base specifically, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, for us, well, the firm was looking for small base specifically, and we could have looked for other things, like we could have had single, and then maybe did some modifications, but we try to keep the capital expenditure and the TIs kind of low. So at the time, we were just looking for the multi-tenant because they were, specifically trying to build out, empower the last mile. And so it was looking for e-commerce, and then of course, blue collar jobs. And these were going to be our tenants that were going to be in the building. And so multi-tenant, especially small base, really was the answer. And there's so many pros for it, right? You can have that diversified client base where your renters can be all in different types of industries instead of having that one contract with that one specific, company, whether it's Amazon, etc. And those are good too, but nevertheless, that's what we were trying to map out. And so that's kind of why they were focusing on small bay specifically. And even for my own personal portfolio, I kind of tend to like small bay also, just because it's just like, it gets that diversification, and then it's not just one tenant that you're relying on for the whole entire portfolio or the deal itself.
Yeah, I asked because I was just curious on how you approach it, because I love small bay industrial as well. My own portfolio, I have a lot of that small bay industrial for those exact reasons that you mentioned. You've more diversity. If you have one tenant leave, you don't have to worry about your whole all of your revenue evaporating at the same time. And the other thing that I found is a small bay inventory. A lot of it was made pre 1990. I'm not sure how it would have been in Southern Florida, but a lot of that small bay stuff that I've noticed, it's like that 30, 40-year-old vintage stuff, and it's just very expensive to replace that. That's why you don't see a lot of new small bay inventory of like those 2 to 3,000 square foot bays. It's just very
Mhm.
expensive to put extra demising walls in, extra unit heaters, extra overhead doors, extra washrooms, extra office space. It's very expensive to do. So the new inventory that does come on, it's limited and it's very expensive. And I've noticed that a lot of those companies that require small bays, they don't necessarily need the most modern building. They just need a spot to do whatever they need to do within their bay. And if they can save money by being in an older bay that still serves their purposes, they're not going to pay a premium to be in a new space. So I love that small bay stuff too. So I'm glad that you're kind of on that exact same page on why you explored that. So now, so you've found a list of all the tools that you've used, and someone can easily go on and do that. If they wanted to look at a market right now, they wanted to look at Toronto and Canada. They wanted to expand into Toronto. They could go into Google Earth. They can identify where the industrial areas are. You can use Google Street View to figuratively, I was about to say literally, but I'm trying not to use literally in the wrong context. They could figuratively drive down the road and identify opportunities. You can use systems to track information to get the owner. So let's say somebody was going to do that. They're looking in Toronto. What would be a message that you'd start sending out to these property owners now that you've identified it? You've tagged the hunt. I love that term as well. Tag the hunt. What's the message now that you're trying to send to these property owners?
Well, I would leverage my, me being a veteran, because people tend not to be mean to a veteran. They'll give you about 2 seconds, right? So they're like, I'm not going to hang up on you because you're a vet. I'll give you 2 seconds. So that was an advantage that I had. But I would keep it brief, to the point, and because it's kind of like trying to sway somebody into it. It's a long, especially with these owners. They're different type of owners, industrial owners in my experience. So I would, it was the different types of messages that we would change time and time again. I usually, like I said, the most important thing at the time was emails and calling, and mostly emails, just because people were, the responses from the data from most people who did can't cold call campaigns, they just like the emails were, the creme de la creme. And so I would send out emails. I think the thing is, I would always change the content lines. I would keep it brief, short, to the point. What's in their best interest first. I wouldn't be like, hey, you know me, I started when I was young and I was born in Maryland. They'd be like, click, what's in it for me? So I would get straight to the point. At a certain point, I did bring somebody else in that was from the UK, and he had a accent, from because he's from the UK, right? He would always get his calls answered. People will call him back. It's an American psyche that people from the UK, like when they speak, they just sound sophisticated and they know what they're doing. So every time I would listen to his calls, people would be like, "Oh, I remember your voice. Oh, you have a great accent. How can I help you?" And they're like, "Oh, well, can I talk to the manager?" And they're like, "Yes, of course. I will find him for you." But if I call, they'd be like, "Click." So I just tapped into the American psyche with that guy, and he stuck to the script. Sometimes he would, freestyle if the moment required it. But they had scripts. I wrote them out, and they kind of just like kept it brief to the point. We would close fast. We didn't say all cash because it kind of sounded a little trashy sometimes. So we would just say, quick to close. We don't want to waste anyone's time, and just straight to the point. And we're quick to get out the paper, the LOI, the letter of intent, because that starts the dance. So, people don't want to give up information, especially about the industrial property, maybe the, trailing 12 or rent roll, if they don't have something. So I had to strategize with the partners, like, it's a seller's market. So they can tell us to kick rocks like most guys are doing. So we need to show something, and the paper starts it because they at least know you're somewhat serious. So if they have an answer, or if they're like, "Oh, what's your price?" This is where we bring them into warm or hot, and then we would start sending out an LOI after I underwrite the property. So I had to figure out how to underwrite properties also on the front end, just simple math. And then, of course, the manager, he would underwrite it, like the final underwriting. But prior to that, I would sign off the LOI and send it out. After a while, after I started learning what I was doing and knew what I was doing, and he would quiz me. He'd be like, "Okay, if it's 7 cap 8 and we need 30% on the back end," and then I was like, once I got it down, then he was like, "Okay, you can send out the LOIs, no problem." And so that it was very interesting.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question on that. I see Neil just had a question. Oh, comment. Start practicing your British accent, everyone. That was exactly what I was thinking as you were going through that. Is like, I was like, I could probably impersonate a British accent pretty easily. That's a great tip. Angelica, true. I've worked with British people. They always sound super sophisticated and professional. Yeah, you guys are onto something with this. I think it's a brilliant strategy on that. So now you coming all the way in on this journey of identifying properties now. So you have a message into them, you're getting some basic data, now you're getting an LOI in there. What is your basic underwriting criteria? And you don't need to go in depth on this, even high level, back of the envelope math. What are you typically looking at when you're looking at these properties to make either an LOI or even to advance it to a formal purchase agreement?
Well, it was difficult, especially in the seller's market. People were asking whatever. They were like, "Look, it wasn't even about the property. It was like, hey, I'm gonna ask you my retirement plan. That's the price." So basically, they wanted to sell the property so they could exit out of working and rest of life, be retired. But what I usually did is kind of write it, like we had to take a knee on the ball. So as much as we were want to write it to the numbers, right, like right on the line, it was a seller's market. And so we had to kind of meet them halfway, not let them take all the juice out of the opportunity or the property. So of course they would want to sell it to where it would stabilize. They're like, "Yeah, you can make extra 200,000 in net operating income, so I'm gonna sell it to you for the same price." And we're like, "Come on, we have to do all the work," and then he just walk off. So we did offer some interesting deals of seller financing. I also did, we talked with the partners, and then we started offering opportunities for the buyers. So as much as the buyers would sell it to us, most of their problems or questions to me was, "What am I going to do? You pay me the money. What am I going to do? Go buy out expensive property too?" because the market was in that condition. So they were like, well, what am I supposed to do with all the money you just gave me? I have to put it somewhere. And so we started offering them opportunities to roll some money into our deals or do the seller finance and become the bank in a way, right? And so these kind of deals kind of made a lot of investors interested because they were like, for the first time, I really don't have to do anything. And all I have to do is finally step off this property. I get a little bit money that I want, but I keep a little bit in and roll it down the street and then be able to be in the deal. But like I said, no responsibility, no day-to-day operations. A lot of these guys did own their portfolios and manage them themselves. And so they wanted to step away from that. So and in combination with seller financing and of course just doing we had to make 30% to pay back the investors because we were doing of course real estate syndication deals and we had good terms on those deals. The structure was good in my opinion. I've seen a lot of different real estate syndications, especially ones that come out on YouTube, and their fees are pretty high, but these were at good rates, good split between LPs and GPs, good exit points. I invested early too, so the partners were definitely like, it's good. You want to put up or and so I definitely did because it wasn't just something that I wanted to learn and wanted to do. I was talk the talk and walk the walk. And recently we exited out of there. I invested 100K and then got back 260K within 13, 14 months. But in the
Wow.
first 2 months, we were able to stabilize the asset and build, I think it was 276K of net operating income that we added to the actual property within 2 months of stabilization. So there's a lot of work that could be done to a lot of these properties. As you said, they're older build. The numbers make sense for the sellers. They bought them so long ago and they bought them for almost like $50, $40 per square foot when they bought them. And, industrial real estate became like a trend at a certain point. So the price did really go up. But when they bought them, it was dead. It was just functional space. Nobody was really focused on. And of course, e-commerce and everything wasn't really around back then. But nevertheless, this provided a bunch of opportunities for us to kind of work with the sellers. So between seller financing and then, like I said, underwriting it, so there'll be some 30% on the back end on a 7% exit cap rate, like being conservative, right? 4 would be good, but no, well, the other ones will be good also. And then that's basically how we end up renting the properties, mostly within 5 to 10 years. But the latest deal that or the first one I was invested in, we kind of wanted to have a whole play ran where we bought in and we did an exit. And so we would have proof. But in that first year of our operation, we scaled from 0 to 100 million assets under management. So it was very intense for all of us along the entire way, just generating deals and doing deal flow with realtors, giving them a percentage. And so that kind of helped stimulate a lot of deal flow at the same time also. So I didn't have to call up everybody. I definitely was able to team up with realtors and they were able to bring their books of, sellers to the table also and deals to the table.
I love as you're going through this on how it's just resonating with me is that the system isn't overly complicated. You ideally want to identify an asset class, and in both of our cases, that's industrial. You need to find a way to get properties on your radar, and you talked about a few different ways to do it. You need to have a message to reach out to these people, and creative financing or flexible terms. All those just give options to people that otherwise might not have considered selling. You need to figure out what metrics you have on your end, and you just need to do this repeatedly. And as you guys were able to accomplish, you build $100 million portfolio using a system that it sounds easy, but there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of complex processes that happen behind the scenes. But it really is that straightforward of a process on what you just need to do and put it on rinse and repeat. And congrats to you guys, and especially the one return you had where 260% return on your money in a year or so. That's a fantastic return. I want to talk because I know you're very bullish on the US and you've been in 30 different countries. A couple questions first. Before we get to that one, Beverly had a question about what's on your desk. Sean, is that a Super Saiyan Rose figure on your desk?
Yeah, that's Super Saiyan Vegeta right there. I used to watch it growing up. So yeah, definitely Super Saiyan Vegeta.
That's a keen eye you've got there, Beverly. And I love the set in general too, Sean. It looks awesome. There's another question from Neil that had come up, and I think that this will tie in nicely to just getting your thoughts on different countries and different markets. How many countries have you lived in, and what was your favorite place and your least favorite?
Ooh, well, I'll start with the least favorite. I love them all. I'm gonna be a politician. I love them all. I wouldn't have a least favorite. I love them all. They all been experiences that kind of helped me look at the world differently. And so I'll go to my favorite place where I am now, Thailand. It's been one of my favorite places. The safety, the culture, the people are amazing. I lived in over 30 plus. I haven't kept track, like, but I know it's over 30 plus. And the people here in Thailand are amazing. I mean, they have like, Buddhism. It is not only that they have it, but they practice it daily. So you go downstairs and you're just like, hey, how you? They're like, Swati Kap, Kampuka. And so everywhere you go, people are bowing and showing a sign of respect. Like everybody, cops, this just the culture. That's just what they do in daily interactions. And so I just love that experience about it. It's cost of living. It's very cheap relative to living anywhere else. And of course, the safety. It's very safe here. Crime is low and it's very peaceful. You get a diverse background. And I like Asia a lot. So I kind of want to just, go to Japan for 3 months, live there out the year, and then maybe 3 months in Europe, driving around the Alps and the Swiss and kind of seeing all the great stuff. So that's my like retirement plan. But I love Thailand. Thailand's been my favorite place.
So you're probably staying in Thailand for the foreseeable future, but still investing in the US. Why the
Mhm.
US then, and not some of the other countries you've invested in or lived in? Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, perfect. I did make one investment overseas and I'm just exiting that as quick as possible so I can get my money back to America. But it's multiple reasons. Like I said, any market, you guys can do it. Obstacles to opportunity. You just got to make it happen and have the willpower. And it might be different on scales of probability of success rate, but nevertheless, it's all worth it. And so I focus on America just because people really don't understand kind of what we were alluding to early in the conversation. Data is king. And America has crazy amounts of data. I don't think it's comparable to a lot of countries. And it's just like we got the MLS, we have CoStar, we have just not even only that, even the government has their own little bit of data that they're accumulating. They're bringing in maps, interactive maps, right? And this might just seem basic for Americans, but a lot of places in the world, it's not like that. And not only do we have appraisers, property inspectors, this is the part of the process of purchasing a big asset like real estate. Whereas in other countries, no, you just show up, give them the money, all cash, and there's no inspection date, there's no appraisal process. It's just that's how things are done. And so we have, like I said, the privilege to have all this data, have these financial services like you're talking about. Yeah, I'm going to refinance and then pull this money out. Then I'm going to get that's not, you can't just do that in other markets. The banks are not that flexible to just be like, oh, yeah, we're going to turn around and sell you this property. And then you fix it up a little bit and we're going to give you another loan, and we're going to pay you back out. Like it's just not that easy. The down payments are higher. The interest rates are higher. Also, too, it might not be a part of the culture. So you'll be the only crazy guy out there doing all of that. And you might think, oh, that's opportunity, but still not necessarily because systems aren't built to complement that type of enterprise, meaning the bankings, the mortgage brokers, like they're not like in that mode of investors. And like I said, whether it's a buy and hold, whether it's a fix or flip, you got hard money lenders. Like you got so many ways to go about fixing and solving problems. And other countries they just don't have all those systems, opportunities, services, and companies and entities built out like that. So that's why I focus mainly. And you could do it remote.
Very much so, as you've proven. It's interesting as you say that. I interviewed a guy from China last week, Bjarne, and he's lived in Shanghai for the last 19 years, I believe, and he works there, and he's works in industrial real estate. And I didn't know that in China you don't actually own the land; you rent it from the government. So you enter into a longer term lease agreement with the government, and you hope that the government renews it when the lease comes up. But I don't know if there's any guarantee on that either. Whereas, like you said, in the U.S. and Canada, where I am, it's fee simple ownership. You own the land, so you've got the comfort of knowing that for all those things that you said, all the infrastructure that's in place, all the support systems, property management, appraisal, like you mentioned, there's so many reasons just to be bullish about that market. So maybe I was supposed to see if anyone else had any questions, and then I just kind of want to wrap up on what your outlook is for 2023 and beyond in the industrial space. I saw Bev had a quick comment. Always asking the critical questions. Yeah, can you imagine me as a journalist and like in some important political event and everyone's asking questions, and I'd probably be the guy that asks if anyone wants to go and grab a beer afterwards. So yeah, I'm not a hard-hitting journalist. I just like to have fun. So thanks for pointing that out, Beverly. So if anyone else has any questions for Sean, we'll wrap up on just getting your outlook for 2023 and beyond, specific to industrial real estate, or you can be in broad and talk about the economy as a whole, but just what your outlook is, what you're looking to invest in, and what excites or perhaps even scares you going forward.
Ooh. Oh man,
That is
you hit me. That's a good one right there. 10 hours later. No. Let me think. So going forward for myself, I think, it's hard for me. I have to transition. I'm a single man in Thailand. Expenses are low. I'm an accredited investor. I was able to build myself to a multimillionaire at a younger age. So even all that stuff that made me like, oh man, you got a bunch of the hustle and the energy and just the challenge. I have to now fight myself to scale it down and save the wealth and be more conservative. And so it's not about age, like, oh, if you're 60, that's when you're conservative. No, it's when you're financially secure. That's when you want to start transitioning and stop taking so many risks, right? And so it's good to do it while you're young. But just for me right now, I just have to scale it back and scale it down. So I kind of look at my state. If I have to invest any money, like hard cash, it usually goes into the stock portfolio because I usually just borrow against it, maybe in a line of credit against my securities or a margin, depending on the term of how much I have to send out. And then I take the cash and I only spend it in real estate syndications or an industrial deal. But for residential, I'll never spend my cash just because we have house hacking. We have people who you can get into property with no money down and start generating income and just build up small multifamilies, right? I don't need to go buy 100,000 apartment complex and put all this money behind because it's a lot of risk too when we add up the difference between industrial and then of course residential. We know that whether it's tenants, whether it's the issues for maintenance, all those things are reduced when we're talking about industrial, right? And so it's just so easier to go with industrial. So if I do industrial, then I follow with the syndications. I look at a couple, real estate investment firms. I do that. I wait for my great deal that I told you I missed out on. I'm steadily looking for another great deal, just that one amazing deal for my own warehouse that I want to own outright, just me personally. And until I find it, I'll keep searching and finding that seller deal. And then, of course, just really putting everything more and making it conservative. As far as the overall market and everything, I always just tell people there's so many opportunities. And I tell people this in Thailand, Africa, wherever I'm at. I'm like, yeah, as much as you're nationally, and from America, or excuse me, from Canada, from Thailand, economically, you're a global citizen. And so even somebody from the Philippines can own property and real estate in America, which is not allowed the other way around. And so that's the beauty about America, is that anybody from anywhere remotely can own property and never step foot in America. And that's an amazing thing. That's not a story that could be told in other countries, because you're definitely not going to sell or finance no money down somebody's property in Turkey. They're going to tell you ha, you're right. You pay me in cash tonight, right? And so bring it in the bag, If you bring it in physical, I'll give you a discount, So that's the type of stuff that happens in other markets. But America just has all this opportunity. And as much as it might look bleak or the charts are saying this and da 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 da. I think that the future looks bright, and even if we're not number one, if China takes the top, we're number two. We're all right. So we just got to keep marching forward. And I definitely think there's so much space for people to build out and invest in industrial property. If you ask me, I think it's amazing. I think we have to change our infrastructure to kind of match the infrastructure that's digital. It's kind of like what happened with Alibaba. I heard it from Jack Ma. He said the same thing. We have a digital revolution, but we haven't had a physical infrastructure revolution to complement the digital revolution. So we have to build this concrete brick and mortar and all these stones up into the same type of, infrastructure that will support a digital revolution. So I think industrial real estate is how we make America great again, and how we build that stuff out, and how we just the best is yet to come. I think we got it all in front of us, and it's so fun to be a part of this. And I think just bringing back manufacturing, bringing back warehouses, I think we're just going to do great things, because as you heard the guy from China, their industrial parks and infrastructure is ridiculous, right? Like every business is almost integral, and they're all on the same street. So it just helps with just the supply chain way more easier than we got it. Oh man, one's down there, one's around the corner, and it just makes things more difficult for us.
That's a mic drop moment right there on just how you summed up everything that excites me about the asset class as well. And yeah, I agree with you. There could be short-term pains that come up, and that's just a cycle that's happened every market in history, and it's going to continue happening in the future. But if you take that long-term outlook, I think industrial is a pretty awesome place to be in. So congratulations on your success, and thanks for sharing all your insight on this too, Sean. I loved hearing your story and how you transitioned into it, and just I can see the excitement in your voice when you're just talking about that. So I really do want to thank you for jumping in on this. Wanted to thank everybody who joined in. If we didn't get to any of your questions, I apologize, but thanks to everyone that tuned in. If you're watching this after, really appreciate it if you could throw us a like or dislike if you didn't like it. If you don't like my shirt, or if you don't like the little rose scion thing on Sean's desk, give it a dislike, or leave us a comment. We'd certainly appreciate that as well. But mostly, thanks, Sean. Really do appreciate this, and I hope that you and I can continue the conversation too down the road.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Because I wouldn't want to talk to you about the other stuff I got going on in the future. So yeah.
Well, let's continue this chat offline, and we'll certainly I keep it going. But yeah, thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. Have a great day, and Sean, we'll keep in touch.